Okay, let's get started then. I've just got a few introductory comments and remarks about this particular session. This is related to the Artificial Life Journal, and so I'm just going to be saying a few things about the journal, and then we'll get into the 4 presentations after that. So many of you will know about the Artificial Life Journal. It's kind of a companion to the Artificial Life series of conferences. It's published by MIT Press and is comes under the auspices of ISAL, the same way that the conference does. The 2 editors-in-chief of the journal are currently myself and Alan Doran, which is quite useful because we're on opposite sides of the globe, so we kind of get a 24-hour coverage of things. That's why Alan might be joining us later after he's had his dinner, and I'm here just after I've had my breakfast. Let's say Alan's in Australia at Monash, and I'm in the UK in the University of York. We also have complementary interests in the artificial life arena. Alan's more into agent-based modeling, virtual ecosystems, lots to do with bees, both real and virtual, and also quite heavily into the art side. Whereas I'm interested also in agent-based modeling, but mostly in artificial chemistries and complex systems and emergence and so on, with a sideline in unconventional computing. We also have a bunch of associate editors who help us often with finding reviewers. And we also have special editors for special aspects of the journal. So the scope of the journal is artificial life, but that covers, we've kind of put that into a variety of subtopics. So articles are welcome on artificial organisms, which are artificial entities that behave like or can be classified as individual artificial organisms. That can be in robotics and wet life for sort of hard artificial life, but also simulated virtual organisms for soft artificial life. And in organisms, we're interested in things like embodiment, situatedness, morphogenesis, how they grow, how they self-assemble, and so on. And then at the next level up, we also welcome articles on artificial ecosystems and societies, where you have collections of diverse interacting organisms. And this covers all of ecology and evolution, and also social and cultural systems, and so on, with the simulated virtual worlds and whatever. But we're also interested in tools and techniques for artificial life. So how you analyze, how you use it, how you simulate it, and so on. So a variety of tools, both for doing the research, but also for outreach in education, art, and so on. A big theme is open-endedness. We heard a little bit about open-endedness in Stuart's lovely keynote just now. This is the endless forms most beautiful aspect of artificial life, which gets people quite interested. And this covers things like open-endedness in artificial chemistries, in origin of life, major transitions, these kinds of things. So we're interested in, artificial life as a source of innovation, creativity, and diversity. And we're also interested in things like the history and philosophy of artificial life, where it came from, the big questions, and so on. What is life, if you want to actually go down that rabbit hole. But also questions on philosophy to do with the ethics, if we are actually making life, and so on. And the history of where we came from. And there was a lot of that actually at last year's Artificial Life, with the focus on 100 years of the word robot. That there is actually quite a deep history of artificial life. It's not just something from the last decade or so. One of the things that you'll notice that's not on there are just bog standard artificial intelligence, machine learning. There are lots of journals for that, and we're not probably the right place either to put novel kinds of search algorithm either. But any of the true artificial life stuff, we welcome your contributions. And this can be in a variety of forms. The standard approach of a research article, but we can have short letters, fast track articles. And we're also very interested in review articles, but do contact us if you want to write a substantial review article. We are interested in publishing those as well. We're published through MIT Press, and so we have a variety of policies that we are keen to adopt, which we focus on the MIT Press approach to that. So the open data and code policy, we can have an open access contributions as well. I'm afraid you have to pay for that, but if you don't want to pay, you can go through the usual approach, which is a subscription journal approach. We also publish special issues. Each conference has a special issue of the best papers extended, but we can also publish special issues on other workshops, other conferences, or if you've just got an idea for a special issue, please contact us and we'd be interested in talking about that. And the one thing is, if you're in a standard issue, not a special issue, if you're in a standard issue, you're guaranteed a speaking slot at the subsequent year's Artificial Life conference. And that's what this session is now. We offered a speaking slot to all the contributors from the non-special issues of last year, and 4 accepted and are coming along virtually today to give their presentations. So I will move away from that. I'll stop sharing the screen. So we'll move over.
I'll be present.
Sorry, our first speaker is doubly virtual today because it's 4 o'clock in the morning for him, so he has provided a video. So please bear with me while I try and make sure that the video works and get the screen sharing going. So our first speaker is Eric Pena, who, along with Hiroki Sayama, published a paper in the journal called A Life Worth Mentioning, and I will now attempt to play the video. Please tell me if the sound isn't working, because I'm not sure I'll get this right.
I'll be presenting A Life Worth Mentioning. This work was conducted by Hiroki Sayama and myself at the Binghamton University Center for Collective Dynamics of Complex Systems. This was also written as a paper in the Artificial Life Journal and is currently available to anyone who is interested in learning more. I first want to take a moment to remember Professor John Horton Conway, who was the Applied and Computational Mathematics professor at Princeton. And he was considered arguably one of the most enthusiastic mathematicians who's ever lived. One of his close collaborators even called him the magical genius. He said this because he wasn't only someone smarter than most people, but someone who thought in a completely different way. He was passionate about finding elegant solutions to the problems that he would tackle. So his style was very much appreciated. Unfortunately, he did pass away in 2020 from COVID-19, but he did make major contributions to many areas, especially an area called recreational mathematics or mathematical games. So he was also largely known for having created the popular cellular automata rule called Game of Life. And he did this in 1970. And this very much motivated the work that you'll be hearing about today. Briefly, cellular automata is a discrete model that consists of cells. These cells live in states, and these states change according to rules. And the rules are just defined by the cell states and their neighborhoods. So here's an example of what a Moore neighborhood might look like. And Conway's Game of Life can be summed up very briefly. It's a simple set of rules here. It says that if you're a live cell with 2 or 3 live neighbors, then you survive in the next generation. If you're a dead cell, then with 3 live neighbors, you become alive. And then all other live cells die and all dead cells stay dead. So here's an animation of what Game of Life, how Game of Life might evolve through time, given some random initial condition. And time is understood to be the repeated application of these rules. And then here's a convenient notation that's typically used to describe game of life and other life-like rules more generally. It's this birth survival notation here. So a good starting point could be to ask the question, how much complexity does a two-dimensional pattern contain like this? And you can think about this in many different ways: symmetry, compressibility, information. But we first want to mention that something like Shannon entropy is simply just not good enough to capture an aesthetic structure like this in a two-dimensional grid. A good way to show this is that we have 4 unique aesthetic patterns here. You can clearly see that they're different, but the Shannon entropy measure is simply not good enough to differentiate between these patterns. So we can move on to conditional entropy. On the left, more generally, the conditional entropy can give us the amount of information to describe some random variable y, given that you have some knowledge of another random variable x. And this is convenient when you apply it to the cellular automata framework. You can say, what is the amount of information needed to describe some cell state, given that you know one of its neighbors? Let's say the upward neighbor, for example. And we could do this for all 4 von Neumann neighborhood directions and take an average. So this would be a good way to describe this pattern. We can say this gamma value is 0.68 bits of information to describe this pattern. But we also want to consider randomized configurations and say, what is the distance away from this randomized configuration? So it allows us to create a measure that could be a standard measure that could be used across several lifelike rules. So this randomized configuration could be understood as the unconditional entropy. And then when you take a difference, this essentially becomes a complexity measure that we use to define complexity on two-dimensional grids. So a preview of results, I'll say that I'll talk about the complexity of game of life itself. And then I'll go into the complexity of low density and high density lifelike rules and how they compare to Conway's game of life. So Conway's game of life was studied on its own by generating 5,000 final life patterns for each individual grid size here. There's 4 different grid sizes. And then for each of these, the gamma values and the gamma values of life itself and its corresponding randomized configurations were measured. And then the delta complexity measure was calculated as well. So on the left, you can see the gamma values of life and their corresponding random configurations and how the relationship between gamma and the density. And density is defined as the number of live cells on a grid. And then on the right, it's the delta value, which is simply the difference between these red and blue trajectories. And a couple things to note is that life reaches a threshold here at about 0.04 bits of information, and also that complexity tends to be independent of grid size. So for low density study, we study these trajectories through time in the complexity density domain. And I'll first mention that there's these 3 rules here that were investigated, but were shown to not, they didn't follow life's trajectory close enough and were not interesting enough to be studied further. So these were not considered beyond just creating these trajectories. But there are a bundle of rules here that are interesting and do follow life's trajectory more closely. When we zoom in, we can see that the rules are 8 life, honey life, low death, and pedestrian life. And some interesting things to note about this figure is that life maintains dynamic activity for an extended period of time. So that's the first thing to notice here. And life does this. It has high or even higher complexity compared to other lifelike rules that follow its trajectory quite closely. And it does this all while being the most parsimonious. So that's just to say that it has the least number of rule conditions, or game of life is the shortest rule. And it's able to maintain, exhibit the amount of complexity as other rules that are longer. And another thing is that life is a subset of these other rules. So if you notice, this wasn't by design, but life tended to be embedded in the rule conditions of these other rules. So ALife follows life's trajectory quite closely, and also life's rule is embedded in the ALife rule conditions. So what this indicated was that life seems to be the basic ingredient for complex patterns to be generated in these patterns, and almost acts as a complexity engine behind these other rules. We can see that an animation here just to show how similar these rules tend to be in this low density regime. And then for high density rules, we wanted to explore the vast space of possible lifelike rules, and we needed some tool to allow us to conduct this exploration. So we programmed a way to simulate any lifelike rule using Mathematica, and this helped us visualize what the rules might look like. This tool has actually been published as a Wolfram demonstration project and is currently available as well if anyone wants to use this tool to do your own explorations. The webpage also references the paper that we wrote in the Artificial Life Journal. So this high density domain, we searched specifically for rules that had life as a subset. So when we do this, we get this pattern here, and generally as the density increases, so too does the complexity, up until a certain point, because then the grid becomes too saturated with live cells and can no longer exhibit the amount of complexity it did before, until you get to the point where you have this rule that is very close to randomness, essentially, because the complexity measure is so low. And then there's a rule in the middle that is called, we call dynamic life, which is the optimal rule compared to the rule studied here. So this is what the different rules might look like from random configurations. On the lower left, you have game of life. And on the lower right, you have this rule that is very high in density and very close to randomness with respect to its complexity. And the rule in the middle, we call dynamic life, which is the optimal rule compared to the other rules studied here. So some key takeaways for this presentation is that life is parsimonious and maintains dynamic activity for an extended period of time. Complexity of life is independent of grid size. And also life seems to act as the elementary constituent or fundamental element for complex behavior to emerge in other lifelike patterns. And also that there's this concave relationship for higher density rules that tends to emerge whereby an optimal candidate can be proposed, which is what we call dynamic life. So this work has been summed up in a paper called Life Worth Mentioning, Complexity in Lifelike Cellular Automata. It's been published in the Artificial Life Journal and is available to be enjoyed on the journal website. This concludes the presentation. Thank you for allowing me to present this work today, and I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Eric and Hiroki. Sorry, I think I stopped sharing one slide too soon, but that was finished off with a picture of John Conway. And I have a soft spot for the game of life. I remember going to a meeting in the 80s where John Conway was presenting how he and his team actually invented the game of life, which was absolutely fascinating talk. And it's really quite sad that we'll not hear a talk like that again. Are there any questions? Hiroki has very kindly got up at 4 a.m. to to answer any questions that people have got.
Yep. I also have the fond memory with John Houghton Conway. That we invited him as one of the last keynote speakers of ALife 14 in New York. Yes, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Yeah, I remember that talk as well. That was fascinating.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I have a question while we're waiting for people to put their hands up or put something in the chat. This thing that you had with the finding this sort of optimal dynamic life, and the idea that life itself was the generator underlying it. I was just thinking, putting that together with the talk keynote we've just heard from Stuart, where he was talking about learning. And the basic processes. Could you kind of think of life as being some sort of basic metabolism, and then that you learn these more complex approaches in different environments? Would there be some idea to follow there?
Well, I honestly, as a full disclosure, I was not able to watch the Stuart's keynote. It was 3 a.m. So sorry, I might have missed some of the points. Yeah.
No, he was talking about adding learning to, learning as for his life system. You get to learn as well.
Yeah. So there are many different ways to extend the cell automata-based models, such as embedding the state transition rules as a part of the state, for example, like the meta scale. So if you are successful locally in achieving some kind of goals, that particular rule can spread over space. If that's kind of considered as an evolution/learning, I think there is a way to design a system that can automatically achieve the better performance. So for example, we could use the spatial pattern complexity, like Eric measured in this particular paper, that could also be implemented in cell automata, I believe. Yeah, and I see a comment from Terrell. Thank you. So not a question per se, but you'd love to see where Morley falls in your delta rho curve. Yeah, okay. So yeah, I haven't checked that exact role, but we can definitely see how its spatial complexity pattern that maps out in that concave. If that's a high density role, I guess that it's going to be somewhere in that concave relationship. Yeah, but we haven't tried that. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Yeah. Okay. If not, thank you very much, and I will make sure to convey your feedback to Eric. He's now, by the way, he's now back in industry. So.
Oh, back in industry.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yes. Okay. And you're returning at 11:30 to give another talk because.
Yeah. I will give a talk myself. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not that Hiroki is producing all the papers in artificial life. It's just that he and his co-authors accepted the offer of the talks. So I'm not sure whether we should just checking whether there are any more questions, because we have got a few minutes before the slot for the next speaker, and we try and keep to time so that people can move between sessions. So I suppose I would just ask some questions. Oh, okay. So Margaret wants to ask. Margarita wants to ask a question. Over to you. Yeah.
Okay, maybe this is the chance. I'm a biologist, very diverse in that field, but the cellular automata, I'm only starting to grasp, and I have the intuition that there's like a whole world for me to understand, but it's really difficult to sort of understand. So is the cell like an organism? No, because the way I say, because maybe now you tell me if this is completely wrong and then I can change. Like, I'm trying to understand it, and it's like, I think you're giving some rule, and like behavioral rule, and then you put it somewhere, and it's about, the rules are about also about getting somewhere. So you give like a direction, a motivation, otherwise nothing's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then you see how it goes around or spreads.
Yeah.
But is there any update, like feedback, or is it always like you give one rule and then you let it flow?
Yeah. So the original motivation of, go ahead, please.
Yeah, because if it is like that, then like the figures you showed, we saw the triangular shape going from square to square, then especially that would be super interesting, because it would mean that there has to be some kind of, basic life. Like even if real life can update and, do this and that. Well, if you can do this, it sort of suggests that in the end, like when there's a disaster or catastrophe, we lose all our, we go back to the basics. So it really gives the impression now that there is like something that is basic life. And then everything else is about how, the rococo of how much you can decorate and how much fun you can create, and or how much innovation, because you are struggling to survive. But there is something that is life.
Yeah, I will make my response really quick. So the basic motivation of the original Game of Life was inspired by the real biological replication pattern based on density. So low density, high density will basically makes it impossible to replicate. Only the just right density is required. So inspiration came from biology, but many of the physicists now consider the Game of Life and many other cell automata as a more like a discretized model of the universe. So it's at a much, much lower level, like molecules or even atoms, or the field, the magnetic field or whatever gravitational field operates. So we consider cell automata rules as a more like underlying basic physics, and on which emergent pattern may actually flourish. That's kind of the more fundamentalist type of view of the Game of Life model. Yeah, anyway, so I will stop here. Yeah, not to take much of a time from the next presentation. We can continue conversation in the chat.
We have to move on. No?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I think there's a lot of problem with actually calling it Game of Life. I mean, that's it's more Game of Physics, really.
Game of Physics. Yes. But thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So thank you for the questions, and we'll now move on to our second presentation, which is by Sandhya Samarar-Singh.
Exactly. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. We're talking about comprehensive conceptual and computational dynamic framework for autonomous regeneration systems. So if you'd like to share your screen, over to you.
Yes, I'll share it now. Okay. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, thank you, Susan, for this invitation to present this paper. And I'm presenting our PhD students' work, Tran Thais. And Michael Levin, our last author, is a development biologist at Tufts University. And he does a lot of biological experiments on regeneration. And we try to follow what he found in his experiments in this study. So biological regeneration is a very fascinating but very complex phenomenon. I'd like to get your attention to this picture, which is a regeneration in planarian flatworm, which is a very tiny 2 centimeter long, 3 millimeter wide worm. And if you look at this picture, and this actually planaria is a model organism for regeneration. If you look at on the left side, worm is if amputated into 3 segments, and look at these 3 segments separately. After 3 days, you can see that the worm grows back to its original shape, and in 14 days, after amputation, DPA. After 14 days or 2 weeks, each segment has grown into a full worm. And you can see that this animal can recover from any damage. Even a tiny piece as small as 1/279th of a planarian, it's a very tiny piece, can regenerate into a new animal within approximately 2 weeks. The tiny piece first grows into a small worm, like here. You can see a small worm here. And then that grows into a full form by concurrent regeneration of body parts. And the body parts also regenerate the head and tail in the correct position. You can see this is the middle body part. You can see still has the head on the left and the tail on the right. So they correct in the correct orientation. The hydra is another tiny animal that can regenerate. Snails and zebrafish regenerate various parts, but the mammals have very limited capacity, and humans, for example, can regenerate liver. So the planaria is an amazing organism from regeneration perspective. As you can see, regeneration is about anatomical homeostasis, equilibrium. The question of how cells in an organism know what shapes to build and when to stop can be framed as a problem in collective decision-making, challenging the research community to develop conceptual models of how information is processed by cell communities to reliably achieve anatomical shape. So the conceptual models are extremely important because very little is understood about computational aspects sufficient for anatomical homeostasis. Conceptual models of regeneration are also of high importance for regenerative medicine and as a design strategy for synthetic biology, self-repairing robots, and synthetic living machines. So our goal was to propose a novel conceptual framework with mechanisms and algorithms of regeneration for modeling some functional aspects of regeneration in silico. It can be used to motivate hypotheses for advancing the understanding of biological regeneration. Specifically, our framework aims to mimic some essential aspects of complete paternal regeneration observed in the past in vivo studies on the planarian platform. So regeneration process, as you can imagine, is a complex mechanism that involves interaction and communication between cells to maintain complex shapes after amputation. Planaria in particular can produce new tissues from stem cells. They are known as neoblasts, and the cells migrate through the whole organism to the damaged site to regenerate missing parts by stem cell division. And here the stem cell makes an identical copy of itself and a new tissue cell, and the process repeats over and over until the damaged region has been restored to the original shape. So some questions arise out of this. What mechanisms are used in regeneration? How do even a small piece of the body know the whole pattern? Is the process fully emergent, or is some or all of global target pattern information stored somewhere for pattern homeostasis and error reduction over time during regeneration is retrieved? Our research proposed a conceptual framework that offers hypothetical answers to some of these questions to design improved regeneration systems that completely and correctly regenerate their form, that in a broad sense resemble biological systems. So regeneration is a biological computing process. So there are some few past models. Most of them are single tissue models. And the general idea is that in these tissue models, there are a number of hundreds of thousands of cells, and all cells communicate with each other. And each cell stores the total number of signals received by it, and then during regeneration, it tries to add new cells until it restores the total signal in each cell. So it's more like error correction. In here, there are a lot of communication and computation. Agent-based models also have been used for modeling cell communication, and they tend to be very complex information sharing and a lot of computation to restore patterns. So the main limitation in past models is the computational burden and limited success in achieving complete recovery, and there's no framework for regeneration, and they're mainly simple or single tissue models. So we propose a framework that achieves complete and accurate regeneration of an in silico worm-like organism consisting of multiple tissues. And much like the body-wide immortality of planaria, with minimal computational burden. Body-wide immortality is what I showed you earlier. Even a tiny piece can regenerate into the whole animal. Therefore, animal cannot be killed. Each pass regrows, as long as there's at least one stem cell. So we developed our framework is an extension of a previously published work, which was published in the proceedings of AI 2018. And in that work, we developed a single tissue model. We call it autonomous tissue regeneration model. And we just did a very simple circular tissue model and make it autonomously regenerate. So this is a system that recognizes its own pattern, integrity, and reacts to damage for efficient restoration. What you see here on the left is the tissue, and the blue dots are about 3,000 tissue cells, right? And in the middle is a stem cell, right? So stem cell kind of is the manager of this tissue. So in this regeneration system, there are two aspects. On the right side, you can see the model has global sensing and local sensing. In the global sensing, it is done by the stem cells, which is in the middle. If you look at the middle figure, stem cell is right in the middle, and we divide this tissue into some, in this case, 12 segments. That's for easier computation for the stem cell. So the stem cell pretty much monitors the whole tissue integrity using global sensing. So what global sensing is, basically, right, if you look at the middle equation E here, the stem cell computes a sort of a global measure for the tissue, which is the communication entropy. So it's a P log pi, and P is a distance from the stem cell to any cell, and they're using DI, and DJ is the distance from stem cell to any cell, and from there we can use some sort of probability or communication intensity in P, and the P log pi is the communication entropy. So the stem cell uses entropy for all 12 segments to monitor its state. When the entropy changes, stem cell recognizes it, and then from there it recognizes where in the which segment is damaged, and then it talks to the tissues. So tissues are represented by a simple perceptron model, and then it asks the tissues to go to that location and find the damage and the damage border. So this is where the local sensing happens. So after the stem cell figures out the global area, and then it talks to the tissues to find the specific damage in the tissue. So tissue cell is basically perceptron network for identifying the damage. For example, this one of the blue cells, I am showing the four blue cells here. There are 3,000 blue cells, and if you look at the middle cell, it only communicates with the neighbors. So it's not a hugely extensive communication network. It's just a simple local communication, and each cell is a perceptron. So each one receives signals from other cells, and the weights are fixed to 1 in this case to keep it simple. And the C1, C2, C3, C4 are the inputs from other cells. They are basically 1 or 0. 1 meaning I'm here, 0 meaning I'm not here. That means I'm dead or I'm damaged. So based on this, they produce an output as a perceptron. The output is 1 or 0. So see, very simple logic in here. If it's an interior cell, right in the middle of the tissue somewhere, it has four neighbors. You can see here 4 neighbors. And so if all 4 are there, output is 1. If not all 4 are there, it would be 0. Right? For a border cell, which is right on the edge of the tissue, there are only 3 neighbors. So if all of them are present, output is 1. If not all of them are present, output is 0. And from here, and for example, here you can see how the perceptron computes. If all 4 are present, for example, for the interior cell, if all of them are present, output is 1. If not all are present, output is 0. And in this way, it can item. If you look at the last figure D, it shows if there's a damage here, all the outputs around the cells outside the damage area will have 0 output. And from here, very simple perceptron communication can find the damage boundary, right? So once this is done, stem cell can come to the boundary and then repair this area. So that's the basic idea of the tissue. The tissue is a two-dimensional perceptual neural network with locally bidirectional connections. Basically, it's a distributed memory system with local information processing, which is a form of a sparsely connected auto-associated neural network. It's a very simple communication. The stem cell and tissue cell collaborate to identify and recover from damage with two simple communication processes. Like I told you, the tissue cells communicate with cells in their local neighborhood to establish neighborhood rules, like the one I showed you earlier, and that defines the tissue pattern. Stem cell communicates with tissue cells to monitor the tissue integrity, which is entropy. And when the entropy changes, stem cell identifies general damage region and activates the tissue perceptron network to find the damaged border. Then the stem cell migrates to the damaged border and repair damage with the help of the tissue ANA. Example is here. If you look at the right side, the first figure shows that we remove randomly 5 cells all over the place. All 12 segments receive damage. And then in the second case, some big chunk of the cells are gone from the perimeter area. So if you look at the entropy figure, the blue line shows the normal entropy when there's no damage. And the orange line shows entropy for the number of cells, 5 cells removed from each segment. So you can see entropy is changing. So that means the stem cell knows that each segment has received damage. And the green line shows the entropy for the second damage, where a chunk of the red cells are gone. So from here you can see that segment 4, 5, 6, 7 has received damage. Therefore, when it recognizes that, it can talk to the tissue cell and say, focus on these 4 segments and then find the damage border there so that I can come and repair it. So the example of that second example of damage, so this red region is damaged and stem cell is here. And once it's figured out that this section is damaged, it talks to the tissue cell, a network, perceptron network, and it finds the damaged border using the ideas I just explained earlier. And then the stem cell goes there and then it just repairs the damage slowly. And you can see at the end, damage is gone. So this model addressed 2 main limitations of the previous regeneration models: computational burden and limited recovery. However, although it recovers from small and large damages, but damaged tissue must remain the pattern information during regeneration. That means at least one string of cells from the stem cell to the border must remain to provide tissue radius. Without it, it cannot do, if the whole perimeter outer region is gone, this model cannot work because it doesn't know how far to go. So therefore, that's a problem. So that means we need minimum pattern information to make it fully autonomous and completely recover from anything, any damage. So we thought of what to do, and then we came up with this idea of information field. So only difference in the circular tissue is the information field right in the middle. Everything else is, as you shown before, this is a border cell, this is an interior cell, and we look at the neighborhood rules I showed you earlier, perceptron rules, and these are the property of the tissue, and the stem cell knows entropy, but the new information field is the new addition. But we know from biology experiments that pattern information seems to be available somewhere in an as yet unknown location, and stem cell use this information in damage repair. Therefore, we propose the existence of a cellular memory space, an information field from which pattern information can be accessed from anywhere in the organism. So we hypothesize that this field exists as part of stem cell. So the stem cell extract the tissue plan, minimum pattern information from its communication with tissue cells, and retain it in its information field to extend the recovery to any damage anywhere. So this is the new thing we extended. And then we also developed triangular tissues using the same ideas and information field. So in the information field for triangular tissue, it has to have minimum pattern will be the base length and the height. And that's the aspect ratio. And the base length is D. And N is number of corners. It should be 3 here, not 4, because there are 3 corners. And everything, the rules for the perceptron would be right here, like the interior cells, border cells, corner cells, very similar to what I showed you earlier. And now it has a tissue repair system using same ideas of global sensing and local sensing. So some examples for that will be if you cut the triangle tissue in the middle, like here, and also a severe damage on the right side, and we can see that how the network proper one, original one, and once you cut the top part out, it is like this, and then from the bottom you can see that the entropy has changed from the normal line to the other line. So the two segments have received damage, and these segments are here. So then from here, that part of the network, tissue network, is activated, and it finds the tissue border, and then the stem cell goes there, and then it regenerates the other part, so that entropy returns to normal. If you look at the tiny piece now, it's a very complex. So for that solution, it has to come up with it has to tap into the information field to get the pattern information, and then it's in a similar way it recovers the pattern. And we also designed a rectangular tissue cells, and this is tissue repair systems, and then we put them together to create a virtual organism. And now we have head, body, and tail, and 3 stem cells. So on top of these separate tissues, we also had created a stem cell network, the C1, C2, C3. And these stem cells are linear neurons, and they communicate with each other like a linear neural network. So we have a stem cell network for regenerating missing stem cells, and also with the stem cell network, we can do even whole body tissue damage can be repaired. So now, if you look at the stem cell, head stem cell, body stem cell, and tail stem cell operate as a linear model. And from the linear model, if all cells are there, normal, it would, for example, this head tail would have 5 output, but for various other damages, it will have different values. So from here, it can recognize which stem cell has gone wrong or is missing. So that way it can figure out which stem cell has gone missing, and it can repair the missing stem cells. So now we put them all together into a whole organism regeneration framework. Right. And this framework is, if you look at the figure, there are 2 things. One is the core in interior. These are the 3 separate tissue repair model. And the exterior part is the stem cell network, right? So this whole arrangement is a tissue-wide, modular, large distributed memory, intelligent neural feedback control system. It's a word mouthful, but it achieves complete regeneration through the 2 levels of operation, of a tissue level and the stem cell network level, right? So the whole framework is a simple neurocomputing paradigm that greatly reduces the algorithmic complexity. So what happens here is that if there's only the tissue damage, only the blue area works, and if all the stem cells are there, they are not damaged, then only tissue damage, then the stem cell in a particular tissue that was damaged, it activates the global sensing and local sensing and regenerates, as I showed you before. When there's a stem cell damage, stem cell network gets activated in the top part, and the stem cell monitors the stem cell network, and then once it senses the missing stem cells, and then it replaces missing stem cells. And if the whole tissues are missing, then it directly gets the information from the information field and does the regeneration. However, if only some stem cells are missing, but the tissues are still intact partially, then it invokes the middle part, the tissue cell repair system. And then again, the stem cell now looks at the entropy and then find the damaged region, and then the local network, cell network identifies the damage border, and the stem cell repairs it. So, so it's a kind of 3. Okay, thank you. So I'm almost done. So one example, we show you a couple of examples. This is a worm where the interior small part was taken out. That means the part taken out has a stem cell and some tissue cells remaining. So in this case, this big worm repairs the interior small part, and also the small part will regenerate into a full worm. Here's how it works out. So process of regeneration. So our framework then, when this is gone, stem cell network gets activated and figured out that the second body stem cell is missing. So it creates a new stem cell in the middle part. And then because it knows that it's not full tissue damage, it's partial tissue damage. So it activates the tissue cell network and it finds the damaged border. And then the stem cell repair the whole tissue that was damaged. And then when you have a tiny part that was left over, it's a more complex, so it has to tap into the information field. So only one stem cell was remaining, and then the network creates two new stem cells. And then using the information, minimum pattern information from the field, it generates more like a small worm with the same shape as the original worm. And then it concurrently grows the 3 tissues until it reaches the final pattern. And it also, they figured out, because we label the stem cells 1, 2, 3. So from that labeling, it knows where the head is. So we kind of polarize and introduce polarity with the identifier of 1, 2, 3 for the stem cells. That way it knows where the head and where the tail is. So it knows the head and generates the head in the right direction. So conclusion is that we propose a framework that mimics some of the main features of planning regeneration, that including regeneration of the whole pattern from any tiny fragment and complete and accurate regeneration from minor to severe damages, incurring loss of whole body parts. Proposed framework is robust, versatile, and flexible with complete regeneration ability achieved with minimum computation. This framework also provides a perspective on the role of local and long-range cell interaction and potential information field in regeneration that presents a hypothetical paradigm for understanding the regeneration process. And finally, scientists can exploit the model to provide insights into general self-recognizing, self-organizing, and self-stabilizing cell communities that are intelligent decision-making systems with an increasingly greater resemblance to living systems. And the conceptual and algorithmic ideas here can be potential strategies for biobots in synthetic biology and nature-inspired robotics. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That's great. So we going over to questions. We've got time for a few questions. We have one in the chat to start with, and then one from Hiroki. So Lana asks, what do these planaria worms use as material and energy to regenerate themselves until they regrow their mouth and digestive system?
It's in a medium where, it has a biochemical processes. So I'm sure when it's food, I think the cells produce food and cells keep dividing as long as there is food. Okay, so they're just absorbing it from the medium. Yeah. It's it's very, very fascinating because we don't know where it gets information from, but it grows in the medium.
Yeah. Thanks. Hiroki.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sandhya. So it's a very interesting work. So in the real, planaria, there are lots of neoblast cells distributed over the entire body, right? So can you generalize your framework to the multi-stem cell approach so that stem cells are actually much more distributed entirely? Yeah, good question. As you can see, we develop this in stages. First, we develop the single tissue with the single stem cell, and then 3 different tissues with single stem cell. And we actually extended the work. That paper is in now review by Science Robotics. There actually we added heaps of stem cells, hundreds of stem cells in the tissue, and we developed a system where not only the tissue but also the bioelectric homeostasis is also maintained. Not the pattern but also function is also maintained. So that was the next stage from this work, and the paper is now currently under review. Yeah, okay, so thank you very much. Yeah, we have done the large number of stem cells. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Time's up now, so we will move on to our next speaker, please. And so our next speaker is Abiba Bahani, who is going to be talking on the impossibility of automating ambiguity. Over to you, Abiba. Yeah. Great. We can see your slides, but you're still muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Thank you very much. Over to you.
Great, thanks. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the invite. Yeah, this paper was also published in the Artificial Life Journal, and this is a very brief presentation of the paper. So I'm going to, as the title suggests, I'm going to talk about the impossibility of automating ambiguity, more specifically in relation to ubiquitous machine learning models, machine prediction, and predictive systems that are permeating every sphere of social life. So coming from embodied cognitive science, the inactive cognitive science literature, complexity, even artificial life itself, we've heard again and again that human behavior or complex systems in general are messy, ambiguous, non-determinable, and therefore impossible to predict with precision. As some literature from the inactive and embodied cognitive science highlights that human bodies are, there are infinite ways for human bodies and for human behavior and for human action to become and to act and to behave. They highlight that living bodies have more in common with hurricanes than statues. They emphasize that they are active, dynamic, embedded in histories, in social and cultural norms, and they are gendered, and the political backgrounds in the contexts of a certain body also plays a crucial role. Again, another highlight from the inactive literature, highlighting the intrinsically, inseparable and interlinked nature of agent and environment, where it's never clear to draw a clear line as to where the agent ends and the environment begins, and vice versa. Again, leaning from the inactive literature, we know that in understanding human bodies, or even understanding reality in general, in relation to complex behavior, we are aware that if these things can be captured by anything at all, it's that at the core of them is that they're full of uncertainties, inconsistencies, and ambiguities and contradictions. These are the characteristics that mark human behavior. From the complexity school itself, more specifically critical complexity, with the works of Paul Cilliers and Alicia Herrero, we also see that it's difficult, if not impossible, to capture complex systems in their entirety. Because again, they are messy, they are continually changing, they are dynamic, they are non-determinable, and they are always a moving target. Any model we build can only capture a snapshot of that moving target. So the emphasis here is they are unpredictable. From Alicia Herrero, because human beings and their behavior are complex adaptive phenomena, their precise pathway is simply unpredictable. This is from the ALife literature itself, from Tom Froza and Tagachu, where in this paper where they single out non-determinism as a key characteristics that differentiates humans and artificial beings. Moving on to having highlighted, non-determinability and predictability as a key characteristics of complex adaptive systems, more particularly human behavior. We also see work from critical studies, Black feminist scholars, decolonial studies, highlighting that social structures are permeated by historical injustices and these power asymmetries where where a person, by virtue of their class, their history, their geographical location, their gender, their ability, and so on, social structures either impose a problem or they offer opportunities, meaning that society as it currently exists and as it has existed in the past imposes problems for some while it offers opportunities for others, highlighting the fact that social structures advantage some while they disadvantage others. And a lot of our classifications, a lot of our knowledge systems, a lot of our understandings are permeated with almost invisible social structures and power asymmetries. However, given that, as I said, given that social systems in human behavior and complex adaptive systems are non-predictable, doesn't mean people are not trying to make predictive systems. We find these systems everywhere. We find them in the medical space, in the legal space. Even machine learning systems are used to patrol borders and to in order to detect immigrants, or are used as lie detecting systems. And most recently, we've seen that algorithms were used to determine beneficiaries of social welfare systems within the Dutch government, within the Dutch system, which has created a lot of scandal. Just a little bit of clarification, just because human behavior and social systems are non-determinable doesn't mean that people are just, people just wander aimlessly without any habit or pattern. Yes, people do have, certain patterns. There are some stable behaviors, which has been highlighted again and again throughout this conference. And for any given society, for any given group, we find that there are culturally accepted norms and historically established conventions, and these norms and conventions kind of serve as contextual constraints that organize people. The problem is that those accepted patterns and established conventions within the machine learning space are taken as the ground truths where models are built based on that objective ground truth. I say that with an air quote, with a quotation mark, and that's the cause of much of the problem. And again, it's not to mark all machine learning models as incapable of prediction. It's of course much more. There is much more granular than that. I mean, when you move towards physical systems, you have much more accuracy and predictability. But as you move to social systems, such as predicting welfare beneficiaries, or predicting or building machine learning systems for within the legal space, then the model becomes both useless but also ethically dangerous. So as I said, for example, we have models for weather nowcasting, which is forecasting the weather for the next 2 or 3 hours. Because such models, because such systems there's much less ambiguity, because these systems are something that can be captured by sensors, by data through sensors. We have the models that are produced are much more accurate and much more helpful. The same goes for protein folding. There is also no moral and value judgment when it comes to these systems, when we are dealing with physical or biological systems such as nowcasting or protein folding. And the same goes for modeling board games. These systems can follow some sort of universal rules. They are not messy. Again, they are much less ambiguous, even though they can be classified as complex systems. However, when we move to social systems, such as building models to predict or to detect child abuse cases, or models of depression, then the algorithms, as I said, or the models become not only useless, but also dangerous. And we have a couple of studies to illustrate this. This is from a 2020 study where they tried to, they had 160 teams of machine learning researchers. They tried to predict the trajectories of children from disadvantaged homes. And what they found was not even one model was able to produce a model that merely performed better than the benchmark. Another study, actually this is 2020, not 2022, apologies. They tried to build a model predicting whether relationships will improve or fall apart over time. Again, the models weren't helpful at all. So, as I said, predicting social systems are scientifically erroneous because these systems are, as I said, messy, continually moving, and modeling involves kind of making key decisions. For example, deciding, where the system begins and everything ends. So, like even deciding that kind of boundary is a somewhat subjective phenomena where people are guided by their aims, by their objectives, by their interests, and all this brings some element of subjectivity, and we cannot build models from the view from nowhere. So these are not only scientifically problematic, because machine learning systems for these things are being deployed within the social more and more increasingly. These are also harmful and to some extent dangerous. And unfortunately, as these systems are developed, risks and benefits are distributed unevenly. For people producing and deploying these models, the most they face, the worst they face is criticism or reputational harm. Whereas for the masses, for people who are, scored by these systems, it could be a matter of, it could be discrimination if, such systems are, for example, deployed to in decision-making and hiring. It could be inhumane treatment, or it could be a matter of life and death, for example, for such applications within the medical space. And one recurring theme we find within the AI ethics literature, there is a huge, robust body of work that shows again and again the same thing. The recurring theme is that people at the margins of society, people at the bottom of society in social hierarchies, they face they are mostly negatively disproportionately impacted by these systems. Here we find that targeting tools exclude older workers. We find that face recognition systems that are used, this is in the US, are mislabel and mistarget Black people. So far, we know there are 3 Black African Americans that were detained due to misidentification by facial recognition systems. Again, within the medical sphere, we find that Black people are disproportionately disadvantaged by these systems. This is from a relatively recent paper by OpenAI authors that developed the CLIP model, where they openly admit that their computer vision model, their computer vision system, still suffers from recognizing black faces, where a black image or an image of a black person is much more likely to be labeled as animal or chimpanzee or gorilla or orangutan. So we might say this is a problem for everybody, not marginalized people, but it's important that benefits and harms are distributed unevenly. While we find a certain homogeneous group, take a look at, you know, big tech corporations or those that are developing and deploying these systems, what we find is that most of the time it's privileged people within society that are developing and deploying these systems, whereas people, again, scored and judged by these systems often have very little say, if any at all. And sometimes we don't even know that we are being scored and measured and judged and sorted by algorithmic systems. Sometimes it's not even within our radar. So, which means that responsibilities fall, which means that there is an even distribution of responsibilities in exposure. So just to quickly recap, at the beginning we saw that people in complex adaptive systems are partially open, non-determinable, dynamic, fluctuating, messy, and so on. We also we find increasing amount of machine learning systems that are deployed into the social world to classify, sort, predict human behavior. And these are scientifically programmatic, but also ethically dubious. We've also seen that within society, social privilege and power asymmetries means that some of us have more power, more agency as opposed to others. We've also seen that you know, most vulnerable people at the margins of society disproportionately face negative impacts of algorithmic systems when these systems are deployed into the world. Given that I don't want to leave you with all problems and negatives in the paper, I suggest a few ways forward. One is inspired by Sue Fletcher Watson et al. Given that, you know, human behavior and complex adaptive systems are, you know, open-ended, always moving, always changing, on the one hand, but on the other hand, much of what computation does is trying to capture the complex adaptive phenomena in data and build models. Therefore, kind of closing that openness. Given these two contradictions, one way forward is to fundamentally change, you know, how we do computation or how we build models in a way that accommodates this diversity, this partially openness, this fluidity, this ambiguity. That's one way forward. A lot of this remains kind of a theoretical. A lot of this remains theoretical, but also a little warning: we envision an alternative, different worldview. Doesn't mean our envision or our ideas have to be grounded with unrealistic sci-fi ideas, such as can be seen here by you know, our ideas of singularity or futurism. We have to ground any envisioning of alternative realities on the concrete, on the current state of, you know, what machine learning systems currently do and the problems they also bring themselves, rather than kind of imagining a sci-fi type of world. And another important point to remember as we move forward is, as I try to highlight in this talk, and as I also try to highlight within the paper again and again and again, we find societal hierarchies, and power asymmetries everywhere in society. So any better model or any equitable model we build has to do, has to go beyond, is this model doing good? And we really have to ask, is this shifting power from the most to the least powerful? That way we are heading towards a better and more just models of complex adaptive systems. And that's the end of the talk. Thank you. This is a very brief presentation. You can read the paper for a more nuanced understanding or a more nuanced view. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, so Hiroki is applauding. That's the problem with these virtual. we can't show the applause so well. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Yes, but also Olaf posted the comments, so maybe Olaf's comments can go first.
All right, Olaf has an incredibly long comment. Olaf, do you want to come and read that out rather than me reading it out?
Sorry about that. Yeah, it is very long. Right. So yeah, I was just wondering if you think from your viewpoint, right, of your specialty, could we mitigate, I guess, in the short term in terms of technology, those kind of issues, or should we concentrate our efforts in policies and explaining to the government officials or making regulations, because we can't possibly fix it in the short term? Which one do you think is more reasonable?
I'd say both. Also, I'm trying to work on both. On the one hand, I do a lot of audits for large-scale data sets, mainly for computer vision researchers. And the focus there is on this kind of, as you call them, short term. How do we filter out, bad content? How do we filter out, racist and stereotypical associations of images with text? But also, I'm a researcher, so I have been focusing a lot on that. But the more my work moves on, the more I'm realizing just doing on these, just like running whatever little experiments and proposing here is a way to to mitigate or to filter out this does not cut it. We also have to have some regulations and policy in place. For example, how the responsibilities and accountabilities that need to be placed on both dataset curators and model builders. So both, yes.
Yeah, I expected that. Yeah, thank you.
I also have a question.
You've got a question. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Avery. Very inspiring, the important talk. So, after listening to your talk, the immediate question was, how can ALife help? And then you immediately put the cautious slide at the end. So we are not supposed to come up with some sci-fi type solutions. So, but can we still do this? Because this particular community, ALife, is really against the traditional or typical AI in the market right now. So instead of classifying things or putting some really simplistic algorithm, people in this community is really more about embracing lots of details, individualize the information, how to achieve the lifelike behavior. So I was wondering if you have any ideas about how, computation in different kinds of the forms, not in AI, but more like ALife type of approach, could help to empower people who are currently disproportionately impacted.
Yes, so I highlight this in the paper because ALife is placed at a unique situation, because the ALife community and the ALife researchers come from this rich background where the ambiguities, the messiness, the dynamicity of reality is taken for granted. You don't find this kind of rich background in, say, for example, machine learning or even in the social sciences. So that unique background, that unique grounding gives ALife researchers so there are a number of ways forward I suggest in the paper, but one of the ways forward I mentioned also in this talk is envisioning like a fundamentally different way of building models, way of capturing, or even like trying to capture a snapshot of these systems. So this is where the ALife ALife researchers and the community itself can be creative, can think about how do we build this different kind of computation based on these principles of non-determinability, ambiguity, and messiness of social realities. This is also, as I said, this is a lot of this is theoretical, but that doesn't mean it has to remain theoretical. People can get creative and think ways forward in making that a reality. It's important also to place that caution though, because I've seen a number of attempts at that kind of alternative envisioning, but that seems unfortunately to come from this like sci-fi kind of worldview. We have to be cautious of that. We have to ground that in because the current state of say computer vision models, it doesn't even recognize black faces properly, yet we talk about this sci-fi understanding. So any alternative reality has to be grounded in the current state of what models are doing, not what they might be capable of in the future.
Yeah, I fully agree. Lots of things to think about and take action on. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a fascinating talk. And as you say, there's a lot more in the paper. So I recommend people go and read the paper as well. So thank you very much. And now we're moving on to our final presentation in this session, which is by Hiroki Sayama, who's going to be talking about network-based phase space analysis of the L. Farrell bar problem. Over to you,
okay.
Hiroki.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's the second time I'm here. So thank you, Susan. I'm going to time myself. Okay. So this is essentially the dissertation topic of this student, Shane St. Louis. So he did quite a lot of work. And this presentation is essentially some excerpts that are taken from his final defense. So I'm basically trying to do the academic karaoke by showing his slide, and let's see how much I can explain. All right, so let's go. So this is the L. Farrell bar that actually exists it's a real bar in Santa Fe, New Mexico in the United States. I took a picture myself. It's a really fancy bar and restaurant. It's very popular among the people in Santa Fe, especially the researchers at Santa Fe Institute. So Brian Arthur popularized this bar by setting up the really historically important game theory problem. It's called the L. Farrell bar problem. As a counterexample of the traditional neoclassic economic theory. So the setting is the following. So this bar is very nice, but they have some music concert every Friday-ish, every week, and the capacity is limited. Let's say it's only 60 seats. And imagine there are 100 people in this town. If everybody wants to go to the bar, it's going to be too crowded. Nobody is going to be happy. So, or if you decide to stay, and then if the bar turns out to be too crowded, you made the right decision, so you become happy. Or if you decide to go and the capacity is not exceeded, so you can enjoy the music, so you can also enjoy the bar. So that's kind of the collective decision-making problem, and which is very ill-defined. So each agent has to make a decision, go or no go, without communicating with the other agents. So Brian Arthur posted this back in 1994. Then that became so popular among the many complexity scientists, artificial life researchers, and the economists. So here's the basic rule. You as one of the agents, you decide go to bar or not to go. And if a bar is crowded and if you went to the bar, you don't get the happiness. If you stay home and the bar is not crowded and then you made the wrong decision, so you don't feel happy. So happiness is rewarded if you made the right decision by predicting, what's the right answer. So the basic, the operation of the agent-based model here is that each agent has a bunch of predictors to predict what's going to happen, and based on that, they will make the decision to go or no go. Okay, so in this study, we tested several different strategies. Many of them are very simple, and the details are discussed in the paper published in the ALife journal. But here you have a last correct strategy, last incorrect strategy, always go, never go, random, and enthusiastic. If you are successful in making the right decision, you are more likely to go to the bar, something like that. So I have to say this choices of the strategies are kind of arbitrary. You can put more strategy or less, but the basic premise of this study is to how to analyze the possibility space of the entire collective state of the town of Santa Fe as a dynamical system. So the strategy space can be mapped out as a vector. For example, let's imagine 20 agents take one option, another 20 take another strategy, and etc. And here among those 6 strategies, this is a distribution of agents that are currently adapting each of those strategies. Then the entire state of the town can be mapped into one point in the 6-dimensional vector. So we consider this as a state of the collective. And then by mapping the entire town into the one point in the 6-dimensional space, we can trace how the town itself can change over time in terms of the distribution of strategies. So that's the basic idea of the strategy phase space. So previously, this was a paper published in 2020. So let me just move this here. Yeah. So this is a paper we published in the ALife 2020. Let me try to run this one more time. Yeah. So you can study the phase space dynamics in a low dimensional space. In this particular example, you are seeing that how the collective state changes over time. So basically, the agent's gonna discard unsuccessful strategies. They adapt to more successful strategies over time. Let me try to run this one more time. This is the initial distribution of the strategies in the tertiary plot. And you eventually see that over time, systems spontaneously figure out the best combination of strategies as a collective. So this was done in 2020, and we studied only the 3 strategy combinations. We presented a paper at the ALife online back then. But the key question here is, okay, so this is only limited to 3 strategies or less. So we can't really study any higher dimensional strategy combinations. How can we visualize and conceptualize the structural phase space for such complicated cases? Because people can definitely use more than 3 strategies in making decisions. So, but as long as you are, conceptualizing phase space in the 2D or 3D plots, you are fundamentally limited in terms of complexities of the agent's decision-making process. So here's a new stuff described in this ALife journal paper. Let's construct a network of all the possible situations, parallel universes that the town of Santa Fe could be in. So this will be one situation. You can consider the color of the ball each agent is holding is a strategy. And we can conceptualize each state as a node. And then we can run the simulation from all the initial conditions. And then we can keep track of the transitions from this social state to this social state. There was a transition. And from here to there, you can basically collect all the transitions that took place in the Monte Carlo simulation and start constructing a network. And often you see that the particular transitions are happening more often than not. So you can increase the connection weights between nodes, each of which represent a social state by increasing the edge weight. So that way, by running the bunch of social simulations of this alpha robot problem, you accumulate the massive amount of the social transition events to eventually create the weighted directed graph model. This represents the social phase space. And here's one example. This is coming from the bunch of simulations that used 3 predictors, 3 strategies that each agent could take. Last correct, never, last incorrect. And again, details do not matter much, but you can easily visualize by using the many of the network analysis tools nowadays available. And you can clearly see that this part is acting as an attractor. So in this case, we are just painting the network node, social state based on the in degrees. So this is the high in degree states, which means that no matter where you start the simulation from, agents going to keep switching the strategy. Eventually, they are converging to this particular attractor. And we already discovered some interesting stuff. So for example, here, it can be considered as kind of the river flowing pattern in geography. you may start from here, but eventually you are ending up coming together to go to the ocean. So this river basin structure is actually showing the scale-free property of its degrees distribution. This is a very typical network analysis tools. So we are plotting the couple of different degree distributions of this phase space, and you see there are some heavy tails, and you could actually fit the log scaling at the end of the line to get some decent matching like this. This is also another example. This one is not necessarily the scale-free, but you can still see really big fat tail behavior. So this is already interesting. And we also measure what is the power law exponent for each of the cases. As you increase the number of strategies, the scaling factor gets lower and lower. And the scaling fitting also gets better and better. So it's getting more scale-free. This is one interesting findings. And the next stage of this research is how to characterize the attractor state of the system. So you can consider just in degree, but it doesn't really capture the fundamental attracting property of the system state. So we came up with the idea, sync strongly connected component, or SSCC for short, as a good representation to capture where the attractor is in the network. So this is the idea. If the system is flowing into the final state of final states of systems, it must be a sync, right? But it should also have the strongly connected relationship. Otherwise, that set of nodes should not be called as attractors. So here's one example which has a strongly connected component. So these three nodes can be reached from anywhere else within this component. But this is not a sync because there is outgoing link. So therefore, this is not considered to be attractor. In this case, attractor is actually the one node in the middle. But this case, you see these blue dots, they are strongly connected, and also there is no outgoing links from there. So this can be a good representation of the actual attractor in this particular network. So we use this approach to identify the theoretically validated attractor states in the network. The same result, but now you can see this is indeed a sync strongly connected component, SSCC, and we can also measure, characterize essentially the same idea by using more robust measurement called node attractivity. This is a separate paper published recently in the complexity, but you can measure the essentially harmonic centrality of nodes based on the inverse edge weights. And then we tested whether or not this matches with SSCC. It actually has a very high correlation. So you can use either the rigorous topological analysis to detect SSCC, or you can simply use node attractivity as kind of surrogate metric to detect attractor states. For details, you can look at the complexity paper. This is also open access. Okay, and we tested visualization for several different combinations of strategies. So this is with 3 strategies: enthusiastic, always, and never. So you can easily show that this part represents the final state of the system. And we can go even higher dimensional. This is the power of network measurement approach. Now you can study 4-dimensional strategy space. And again, we can identify this is a final state of the system. And you can easily see that there is a progression of the social evolution to lose the last incorrect strategy spontaneously. And we can go even higher, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strategy distributions. The network is getting bigger and more complicated, but you can still see this is a region of attractiveness. So this way we can study the high dimensional social states by using the network approach. So by using this, what we did, this is going to be the last part of the talk. We also tested which combination of strategies are stronger or weaker compared to the others. So here's one example. I think this is coming from this example, 5 strategy case. So let's take a look at the nodes that are identified as attractor. So what kind of strategies are well represented in this subsection of the phase space? So this is the result. So by collecting lots of data from every node in that attractor state, you can see that in general, always and never are very well represented, but random, last correct, enthusiastic, they are not so much represented in the strategy adopted by each agent. So we created the methodology to categorize which strategy is promoted, which strategy is suppressed. So this way you can actually bring this back to the traditional game theoretic characterization. So if you have the competition among those 5 strategies all together, so always and never won basically in the game. And in the meantime, the other 3 strategies actually lost in the game. So we applied this kind of characterization of all combination strategy sets to come up with this kind of plot. Again, this was facilitated by the network-based approach. We actually came up with an algorithm to detect the attractor states. But anyway, so this is kind of payoff matrix reconstructed from the massive amount of social simulation. How can you read it? So this, the strategies listed at the bottom, each column represents the strategy that was promoted in the presence of other strategies listed here. So beneficiary receives the benefit, payoffs in the presence of the benefactors. So this way you can see that the always gets pretty much always getting the benefit from any kind of strategies, especially it gets the most benefit if you have the never well represented in the society. And the same way, the never also gets some kind of benefit from the presence of always. And in the meantime, you can also see the last correct benefits from the presence of last incorrect and vice versa. As you see, some kind of coupling between the almost 2 opposite strategies. In the meantime, random strategy does not really get promoted very much, and enthusiastic is not really doing anything at all. So that they are 2 failing strategies overall. Okay, and we can also generalize the same idea to the combinations of strategies. So now we expanded the subset of strategies, like not just one strategy, but all kinds of combinations, and they apply the same application, so the same analysis. So these combination of subset of strategies benefited when these combination subset of strategies that were present. And as you see, there is overall the gradient of which combinations are actually doing well in this alpha robot problem. This kind of the global picture was not known before. Anyway, so here are the top performing subsets we discovered in this research. Always never, their combination, and the last correct, last incorrect combinations. So they are both the pairs of strategies that always do the opposite. So this is kind of interesting because the problem itself requires the right balance of 2 opposing decision making. This actually makes sense. The society needs to have 2 completely opposite opinions mixed together. That's if they are present together, that's when the agent actually performs well. Okay. Anyway, to conclude, so we propose a network-based phase space analysis of the alpha robot problem. So we discovered that their overall structure of the phase space is showing there's some kind of scale-free property, and we propose the SSCC, a sync, a strongly connected component, and node attractivity as a good representation of the attractors. And we identified very strong combination strategies, very weak combination strategies by conducting the classification tasks. So we believe that this methodology can be generalizable to many other higher dimensional dynamical system analysis. So we actually published some of the papers that apply the same methodology to analyzing chaotic systems. Anyway, so there are a couple the slides to discuss the future research, but in the interest of time, I'm going to skip them. So thank you very much. This is Shane St. Louis, who did all the work. I'm here, I'm just doing karaoke by using his slides. So thank you very much. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Hiroki. Great karaoke. I enjoyed that. So are there any questions?
Yeah,
either
Russell.
Put your hand up or, yeah. Yeah, Russell's got his hand up.
Yeah, hi. No, I was just wondering in your last comment where you said that you were hoping it would be generalizable to, arbitrary dynamical systems, which would be continuous space.
Exactly, yes.
I was just thinking that your graph analysis techniques would probably require a discrete space for the dynamics.
Exactly.
So how do you see that being generalized?
Yeah. So we simply apply the discretization in the phase space. So that is actually discussed in this paper. It's a very naive approach, but if you have the continuous dynamical system space, just discretize it and then bin each of the continuous state into each of the voxels. So that's a good the practical approach. Obviously, the accuracy of the analysis depends on the resolution of the space, but also if the system is high dimensional, you cannot really go high resolution either, because the number of the nodes is going to skyrocket, quite rapidly. So we did whatever can be done at our best effort, but there is fundamental limitations, of course. I agree.
Okay, thanks. I'm not sure if I missed it as you went through. The actual strategies, was any one of them probabilistic?
Yes.
I'll go 60% of the time.
Yeah, so random is obviously the random.
Okay.
So we put it as a kind of the source of stochasticity. But all the other the strategies are more or less based on deterministic rules.
Yeah. And random, with everybody choosing randomly, never dominated.
Yeah, that's actually interesting, isn't it? Yeah.
It seems it should, yeah.
Yeah. And so this is set to at the right capacity. So theoretically speaking, if everybody chose the random, strategy, it should be perfect solution. But the evolution always actually deviates from that. So random turns out to be kind of a strategy that is always getting exploited. So that's a very interesting outcome. Yeah.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? Great. So was it, you said this was Shane's dissertation? Was this a PhD or?
Yeah, PhD.
Yeah. Okay, so it's
he's
really,
now
really
back
nice
to the industry again.
Oh, keep losing all the good people. Well, at least the good ideas from ALife are going out and polluting people in industry. So that's
yeah, that's our hope. Yeah. Anyway, so thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, so that is the end of this special session, and I hope you can see that there's a wide range of papers that get published in the Artificial Life Journal. So I encourage you to submit your own papers to it. Thank you very much for turning up, and please enjoy what remains of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan.